the HIV/AIDS public health crisis, as well as how cultural institutions and the school district responded to an out gay artist who came out publicly with his HIV positive status months after his last visit to Horn Elementary. A second anchor point is the recent wide-reaching legislation, Senate File 496. The act passed in May 2023 had an injunction that was recently lifted. For reference, it reads, "An act relating to children and students, including establishing a parent's or guardian's right to make decisions affecting the parent's or guardian's child, authorizing the parent or guardian of a student to enroll in a school district, to enroll the student in another attendance center within the same school district in certain specified circumstances, prohibiting instruction related to gender identity and sexual orientation in school districts, charter schools, and innovation zone schools in kindergarten through 6th grade, and modifying provisions related to student health screenings, school district library programs, the educational program provided to students enrolled in school districts, accredited non-public schools and charter schools, other duties of school districts, accredited non-public schools, the Department of Education, the Board of Education examiners, and the governing boards of charter schools and innovation zones, competent private instruction, and special education, including effective DALE provisions." After the panelists share how their work is affected by issues related to the exhibition and SF 496, we will invite the audience to join our conversation with questions to the panelists. We're approaching this event from the perspective of sharing and learning with and from each other. We're here tonight in the public library, a space for all voices to express their opinion, free from fear, bullying, and harassment of any kind. While we might not agree with what is being said, we will agree to remain respectful to promote a productive conversation. To begin our conversation, I would like to invite our panelists to introduce themselves, their affiliation, and some of the work that they've been doing. I'll start with Oluwafemi.
Hi, everyone. My name is Adeagbo Oluwafemi. So I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Community and Behavioral Health at the University of Iowa College of Public Health. I've done a bit of work within the HIV space, and I've done some work with sexual and gender minority as well. And so since I got to Iowa, it was just about 2 years ago, I've been, more focused on HIV prevention because I see kind of trends in HIV incidents in Iowa, although we don't pay attention to it. We think, Iowa is, we have over 3,000 people living with HIV in Iowa, but the HIV incident, new infections yearly is going up bit by bit, and some people are testing late. And imagine someone testing at 35, getting to do the HIV status at 35, and that's dangerous. So, I'm doing a little bit of work around HIV prevention, so I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
I'm Cottrell. I am the Executive Director of Diversity and Cultural Responsiveness in Iowa City Community School District. And in that role, I do a lot of professional development for our staff, principals, teachers, so on and so forth, in regards to cultural proficiency, implicit bias, microaggressions, how to manage dynamics of difference, those sorts of things. And my team works in a multitude of ways to try to help with LGBTQ things and just anything that would impede on us managing dynamics of difference or coming together as a community. So that's really the work I do.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. Thank you for being here. My name is Saba Vlach. I'm an assistant professor of elementary literacy education at the University of Iowa. So in my role, I have a teaching role and a scholarship role and a service role. So I'm going to focus on the teaching role. I teach at both the graduate level for literacy, culture, and language education. And there I teach courses like schooling in the U.S. and I have a critical race theory seminar and sometimes qualitative data methods. But in the undergraduate program, I teach in teacher education. And I'm going to give a shout out to Morgan. My student is here. And so I teach both in an early childhood methods literacy course. I teach and supervise the children's literature course, so we think a lot about the legislation that's happening. And I also am the course supervisor and lead instructor for a new pathway program where when freshmen who are admitted and enroll into the university and they want to be elementary educators, they take 2 courses that freshman year that immediately, and they're part now of the College of Education instead of like waiting to get admitted into the teacher education program. And in that class, again, we think a lot sort of broadly about the world of elementary education and what does it mean to rethink elementary education.
Thank you. So to jump right into kind of the historical grounding, I'm going to introduce a little bit more background behind the Haring exhibition at the Stanley Museum of Art. This was curated by Diana Tweet and opened in May. And it's going to be open until the beginning of March. In the exhibition labels, Tweet wrote, "This exhibition celebrates Haring's legacy in Iowa City and more broadly revisits his commitments to education, human rights, and freedom of expression. Haring is known for his brightly colored, playful figures. He began making public art on subway advertisement boards using white chalk on black paper. His work has broad appeal and an immediately recognizable line. As he gained attention for his large-scale paintings and drawings, he traveled extensively, completing mural projects and working with children in cities across the world. Haring visited Iowa City twice, once in 1984 for a 3-day residency in which he led workshops for students at Horn Elementary, whose art teacher Colleen Erst had led her students in a letter-writing exchange with Haring. He also painted the untitled tarp you see on the left side of this photo during a Johnson County Landmark Band performance and gave a public lecture at the museum. Haring visited a second time in May 1989 for just 1 day. During that time, he worked with students at Horn again and completed the mural that you see on the right in this photo. And this went in the school's media center in the library. In the years between his visits, Haring used his art for activism. He painted live on stage at the Live Aid concert for famine relief, made works speaking out against apartheid in South Africa, and creating works in support of AIDS education and research. From 1984 through 1989, the University of Iowa also made key responses to the AIDS crisis. In 1984, the first reported case of HIV/AIDS came up at the university. That same year, the Gay People's Union, the first LGBTQ+ student org officially recognized in the country, began an AIDS education and prevention campaign at the University of Iowa. In 1985, UI President James Friedman approved a campus-wide ban on discrimination based on sexual orientation, though the policy was not included in UI operations manuals until 1995. In September 1987, the Daily Iowan printed a special report on AIDS, and UI MFA student Michael Bartow performed a musical, The Wizard of AIDS, as a street theater in Iowa City. Haring not only witnessed the illness and death of close friends from AIDS, but he was also diagnosed with it in 1988. He died from AIDS-related complications at age 31 in 1990. When Haring went public with his AIDS diagnosis in a Rolling Stone interview in August 1989, he said, "I think that what will happen with people knowing will be far more interesting than just going on as if nothing had changed and having them find out later. It will force things to happen. Maybe it won't be good. There will be people who will take a stand and still want me to do the work with the kids, and a lot who won't." So kind of with that exhibition grounding and the kind of very brief summary of Haring's life and work, since 1990, when Haring died, researchers have made advancements in the treatment and prevention of AIDS. Access to information about how the virus, what it is, how it spreads, and effective treatments have improved life expectancy and quality of life. So I'll turn it over to you, Oluwafemi. Can you tell us a little bit about what the role of accurate and accessible information has played in what we've seen happen in the AIDS crisis in the 80s, kind of through the 90s and early 2000s?
Yeah, thank you very much for your question. When I read about Haring, I thought about something. He was diagnosed with AIDS in 1988, right? And he died in 1990. That could have been prevented. that could have been prevented, because I know a lot of people living with HIV today, they are over 80, and some that I know have been living with HIV for quite, over 3 decades or 2 decades, something around. So that shows something that, and also from his story, he left for New York, where he was comfortable being openly gay. That's another story in itself. That probably we don't know much about him, but that signals something, that these guys had experienced stigmatization elsewhere before he left for New York. And I'm glad he found home. Also, he found a home in Iowa when he came to Iowa to do. So it was unfortunate that during his time, we're still trying to try a lot of things when it comes to HIV treatment. But I believe if he had known his HIV status earlier, maybe he wouldn't have died of, AIDS complications. And so there's been a lot of advancements, and we understand stigma was very ripe then. And if you look at it today, too, it's coming back. Because I did research recently with black men who have sex with men in Iowa, and most of them said something. It was all about, information. You can see some of them lacked information, and some of them refused to go out there because of this rule. Out there, they felt like it is anti-homosexuality, and they could be easily stigmatized. And some of them would claim that I would rather die not knowing my HIV status, or rather die with my HIV than going out there for someone to label me. So, I think, there's been a lot of advancement. We've seen a lot of progress, but the stigma is still there. And how do we make sure that, and that's why I'm, trying to push prevention. And also I look at the law. I try to read it and see what is some of the things they removed, and the one they ratified in May last year. And I believe, to be candid, that it's good to tell kids from grade 1 to 6. You don't have to tell them about HIV, but you can tell them about, oh, come, you guys don't share sharp objects, because we can contract HIV. I'm not saying they should tell them that way. You can contract HIV if you share needles, razors, or other sharp objects with someone who is living with HIV and not virally suppressed. But there are ways to present the information to kids, and even hepatitis C, by sharing some of these sharp objects. There are ways to present it to them, because health prevention, some of these diseases, it's better than treatment, because we spend a lot more money for treatment than prevention. So if you look at it, I think the major issue now is stigma, and people don't want to test because of the perceived anti-homosexuality rules and hostility towards LGBTQ community, and people would rather stay in or in closet than to go out there and be labeled. So I think what we're facing now is stigma. Stigmatization is kind of very ripe against sexual and gender minority, even HIV. So the problem is not about even HIV itself, it's about HIV identity. So I think stigmatization is still a major problem. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Kind of looking back historically, when AIDS was first being learned about, it was labeled as the gay disease. And as they found out more about it, they found that it's much broader than that. But it carried that stigma for a long time, and it sounds like they still do it.
Yeah, they still do it. They still call it gay disease, right? But let's look at South Africa. South Africa has the highest number of people living with HIV in the world. I worked there for several years of my life, and I worked in KwaZulu-Natal, which is the province with the highest number of people living with HIV. That's 18.1% prevalence in the country. And I will tell you one thing. South Africa we have new HIV infections, close to 200,000 new HIV infections every year in South Africa, and majority were through heterosexual sex. And how is HIV a gay disease? And so, so I think the problem also is about misconception about some of these health conditions. There's a lot of misconception around them and how they're being passed, and the information. So when I read the Iowa, the rule as well, that law, and I think there should be a way to synthesize this information and to make it more, for a lay person to understand. I think there is a lot of miscommunication around HIV. It also boils down to stigma, and we should find a way to destigmatize it. It's not a gay disease. It's not a sexual and gender minority disease. It's everyone's disease. If you don't take care of yourself, if you behave recklessly due to a lot of things, anyone will contract HIV.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that significance of getting information, people learning more, that can help to destigmatize it and help people prevent that having to deal with an infection. And one of the places that kids are getting information are schools and libraries, and they get all kinds of information, not just health information, but different historical perspectives coming into play from events. They learn about current events in their classrooms. And so kind of taking a historical perspective of this, Laura, can you tell us how the district has, in the past, like during the time Keith Haring was coming to the Horn and around that time, how they were treating some of these issues and dealing with giving information to students?
I cannot go back that far, honestly. I started working for the school district in 2015, so I can speak to it from there. I know that Iowa City is known for being liberal in certain ways, and liberal around LGBTQ rights and so on and so forth was kind of how this place was introduced to me, and it made sense. I would say by the time I got to district office and I had to start to impact what teachers received in their professional development, so on and so forth, by that time we started to get a little bit more radical with our policy. And so with the help of my team, we were able to have some of probably the most radical LGBTQ policies around anti-bullying in the state. A lot of other school districts were kind of leaning on us. We were fortunate to have Andrea Jane, who did a lot of policy work and was able to look at what other districts were doing around the country. And so we borrowed some of that language, and we were still within the law, but basically our students were able to choose their pronouns, change their names when they needed to, controversy or not, with or without parent permission, because we were leaning on the mental health of the child over some things, and we would just work with parents around like trying to understand what was going on. Choosing the restrooms that they wanted to go to, locker rooms. We had gender-neutral restrooms built, single-stall restrooms built. Those single-stall restrooms are still in our plans going forward, even though we had, the new legislation had us kind of backpedal how we label those restrooms and who can go in them.
Thanks for providing that historical perspective. And Saba, can you tell us a little bit of how you were trained, kind of a little bit of your training and background in teacher education, and kind of how that's informed how you approach training future teachers?
So my graduate studies and where I really practiced, my initial practice into the world of teacher education happened at the University of Texas at Austin. And so I feel like the legislation of Texas and Florida is sort of what Iowa is kind of competing against, right? Like we are trying to follow that pathway. I will say that I feel like the state of Texas has always had realities of banning books, censoring the types of curriculum that is allowed in the state. But the program that I studied in and where I learned how to be a teacher educator, we would definitely say that we were a critical teacher education program. So we confronted all issues. And that's how I was prepared. So, as I've been very thoughtful about where I want to study and where I want to work. And I come really clear and forward about this is what I believe. And this is why I do this work. And so if you are not the place for me, it's okay. Just let me know because I can find that place. So I'm very fortunate, although it was in Texas, it was a space where I feel like we talked very openly about identities. We talked about language, we talked about multilingualism, we talked about immigration, we talked about race, we talked about racial violence, we talked about racial literacy, we thought a lot about children's literature as an early childhood elementary educator. So I have really carried that forward with me to Iowa. And as part of my, I was very fortunate that I had many opportunities to interview at many different institutions across the United States for this position. And I felt that, okay, I don't know, I didn't want it coming. I'm really from the East Coast and the South. So there is also this idea of critical geographies, right? Like all places have their own ways of navigating. And so when you're from Texas, there are historical realities that everybody in Texas knows. That's quite different in the Midwest. Sometimes the storying of the Midwest is, there may have been atrocities in the South, and there may have been atrocities in the North and this and the West, but we do not have those. We never were participated in those. And so it's been quite a journey for me to sort of understand historically what is the Midwest and what is Iowa specifically. But I did feel that when I came here to interview, again, I showed up in my full self, and I said the things that mattered to me and why I want to work as a teacher educator. And I feel here that in curriculum and instruction, as an elementary teacher educator, as well as a professor for graduate students, I have been supported within the context of the institution, of the University of Iowa. So I guess I'm going to look forward a little bit. In addition to my training, I feel that our teacher education program is also really trying to center the humanity and well-being of our children and our families. And I think there are going to be more questions. I don't want to jump ahead too much. But that was my training. How do we speak to the, culturally relevant pedagogies? How do we uphold and center and value our students' identities, cultural competence, criticality, and their joy? And I feel that that's what I was prepared to do, and I feel that I am still getting to do that work here. And I'm happy to talk more about how we do it here. And of course, I keep in touch with a lot of my colleagues at UT who, in recent years, has become quite challenging, right? Things are being dismantled very intentionally at the university level. And I think we're not quite there at the University of Iowa at that level of dismantling. So, but here's the thing. There's a scholar from Harvard College of Ed, Dr. Jarvis Givens, and he is a scholar of Carter G. Woodson. And he writes about fugitive pedagogies. And that's the thing, that work has always happened, right? There has always been oppression and harm. And there have always been people and educators who have found ways to confront and keep going for the well-being of our young people and their families. So that is how I think of this work. There is no stopping. We have to keep going in it.
Yeah, and I think that conversations like these are really helpful for us to kind of think about ways that we are responding and how our students are affected in ways that we can come together across disciplines and different lines. Some things that I heard you all mention is kind of the theme of well-being, that access to information and community is essential for students' well-being, that there are many layers to a student's identity that need to be tended to and recognized, whether they're getting information or getting health care. How have some of those things been affected in your work with the passage of the Senate File 496 bill? And I'll just let you all jump in as you.
I would say it's been challenging, where it would not have been so challenging if we weren't so radical in the first place. So it almost was like we had to take it all back. So that was really hard for our students in our schools that identify as LGBTQ. That was hard for our staff as well, that identify as LGBTQ, because many of them feel like they're being told they can't be themselves. That it's not okay to be themselves, that it's like, we want you, but we don't want you, is how they feel. And so how do you support that? It's been really challenging. When the injunction was made against 496 and we were able to leave books in the library as is, there was a little glimmer of hope, but there was still a lot of really tender feelings because the restroom situation didn't change. And also around the idea of, I don't know how many of you are familiar with 496, but it lets us know that if a student goes and asks a staff member to, hey, can you call me this instead? Like, I prefer to be called this. Or if they're sharing that they are hiding something from their parents, like they're trans and they don't want their parents to know, that staff is supposed to contact parents. And with it, so staff is like, so wait, what are we doing? And then it would be different if it were just like, yeah, that's what it is, but they're trying to hold people's teaching license to it. So then it gives another layer of fear, another layer of just anxiety for people who want to wrap around the students, especially our students who are historically marginalized, our students who are the ones who, even in our data, show that they feel less welcome, safe, and included. How do you wrap around them? So right now, we're just trying to make space for them. There's most of the buildings, at least middle school and up, have some type of GSA at the building level, or they have trusted adults that they can go to, but not our K-5, not our K-5, and so it's challenging.
And I think it's really important too that, with SF 496, the teachers are actually positioned in ways that real harm can come to them, right? I mean, you will be, there are consequences. And so I feel like, well, I can say in teacher education, okay, so in the higher ed context, we are still really able to take care of the young people who are pursuing education at both the elementary and secondary. You can come with your full humanity, your identity, you can tell us who you are, you can tell us your pronouns, you can tell us how you want to be honored and welcomed and identified. And I feel pretty much all of my colleagues work very hard to make sure that the students who come to study to be teachers are welcomed in the ways that they need to be welcomed. So I will say that. So that is a very different reality than our K through 12 spaces in some ways. And then I think 496 is intentionally ambiguous. And so what it does is it fosters fear, right? So you don't really exactly understand what is going to happen or I think the example that Director Lauren gave just now about, K through 5, and if you identify in these ways, that your parents must be notified. That seems pretty clear, right? And, I don't think any teacher really wants to be a tattletale, do that thing. There's real material consequences to the well-being of our young people. But what we do in teacher education is we talk about the ambiguity. We talk about what how often when fear is instilled in you through these like very long legislations and this, what does that actually mean for you? We urge our teacher candidates to do their own research and study. We urge them to show up in spaces like this so that they can hear. We urge them to read local, national, global news about these issues. So, so we say, you know, this is what's happening in Iowa. This is what's happening in Illinois. This is what's happening in, you know, across the U.S. But we try to really instill in them a responsibility to cultivate what I call humanizing critical sociocultural knowledge. You have to understand that the sociocultural realities of the world are playing out in the institutions of school. You have to understand that teaching is political. You have to understand that race and racism and institutional harm and systemic harm happens at schools. So we, and then I'll say one more thing, you know, so that's kind of our end, like there's always then there's like the university teacher education, and then our teacher candidates go out into the field. And there, our job is to build strong partnerships with the community and with our educational leaders in our neighboring school districts. And there, our work is to honor what our cooperating teachers are doing in their classrooms. So with the injunction, it was like, don't read these books. Okay, yes, now you can read these books. Now again, we're in a place. And so what we do is we meet with teachers, we meet with the education, the principals, we talk about what is the curriculum, what is happening in your schools, what are you reading? Can you show us? You know, how can we talk about critical sociocultural issues? And a lot of the things that we do is we frame it really in terms of funds of knowledge, family, community, and really listening carefully to the young people. Because one thing 496 does not prevent is children can talk about it. The teacher can't, but the child can. And young people are genius. And so they do talk about things. And so how do we prepare our teacher candidates to receive what our genius children and families are saying? So.
And I don't want to hug, but I'm just going to say really quickly, our teachers are frozen at that point, though.
Yeah.
Some of them don't have the capacity to work through that conversation in a way that feels comfortable once students bring those things up.
True.
And then they'll shut it down, they'll go on to the next one. So it's, you know, unfortunately, where they could, they're not, because they're just so frozen.
So I hope that's why maybe a partnership with us too, right, can help teachers also feel supported, that they're not alone, right? There are young people who want to do this work, and again, fugitive pedagogies. How do you speak about these things in ways that may not seem like you're talking about these things, right? I mean, we can say a lot about humanity and well-being. And the other thing about these legislative policies and the rhetoric of politics is there is a lot of misknowledge. And I think for teacher candidates, trying to help them be critical readers of that, because there is so much access to information. So how do you do that work critically to understand?
So for me, I'll approach it from the scholarship aspect of things and the general one. In every research that has been conducted, it's all about volunteers, right? Mm-hmm. But in a situation whereby the supposed volunteers feel like being stigmatized, being attacked, we won't have anyone to participate. And research leads to innovation and everything that we're seeing today. So I get that's a kind of inadvertent impact of some of these legislations. And also the issue of fear, stigma, and another thing when I think about it is the issue of, oftentimes, I'm just going to use sexual and gender minority here as an example, create a kind of family of choice. Because some people are not ready to declare their sexual orientation to their immediate families because of the way they talk about the community. And they create a family of choice, which could be healthy and unhealthy. Some endure violent relationships because they don't have somewhere else to go. And because of all this information, they can't report. Because how do you want to report yourself if someone's going to call my parent to tell them, oh, your son just reported, do you know your son is gay? You know, that kind of thing. So these are the kind of inadvertent effects of it. And for me, I believe freedom of expression is human rights. And when you have adequate information and freedom of expression, it leads to critical consciousness. You know what you're doing. You are aware. You have all the information to make informed decisions about your life, about everything, not only about health. So, and I think it is very, very important. That's why I like the work of Haring a lot, you know, because it's all about freedom of expression. And I was just discussing with my partner this morning, and I just learned this morning that even Animal Farm, that's by George Orwell, and 1984 were banned. I was like, no, these are political, very interesting political, you know, books that you can read that give you some level of consciousness about your world and everything. So for me, I believe freedom of expression should be human rights. And so yes, I know we have information and it should be age appropriate. I agree. Age appropriate, but what is the definition of it? I try to look at the age appropriate in the legislation too. It's just kind of, you know, I don't really want to go in there, but you know, it's somehow it looks ambiguous to a large extent if you look at the definition of age appropriate. But for me, in a nutshell, adequate information is very important, plus freedom of expression to make an informed decision about anything in life. And I think it is human rights. And one should have access to information because that's where you know, that's how you learn, and that's where you make informed decisions about your life, about anything in life, including your health. You take charge because it provides some level of self-efficacy. You feel empowered. And it gives you that opportunity to, it amplifies our voices, you know, even against oppression. I think people should rethink it because there's a lot of inadvertent impact of this on, you know, health and even individuals.
Yeah, so I'm hearing that there are so many components coming together. It's not just about one issue. It's about the complete experience of an individual. And I mean, I like what you mentioned about families of choice. I'm thinking kind of the webs of support, both for young people and also for staff and college students. What are those networks? I mean, if we're thinking about Haring's time, we have ACT UP and different affinity groups within that who are working towards finding out more information about AIDS, about spreading messages, getting people aware and to care about it. How are people finding community right now?
For us, we have an outside organization that works with a lot of our students, and that's United Action for Youth. They have deliberately created spaces for our students. They come and can do therapeutic work as well with parent permission. But they've been a huge resource for us. Other than that, we in our school district, we do restorative practices like restorative circles, dialogue circles, so on and so forth. And we do have staff trained to create those for some of our students when needed. But I don't know of an organization, kind of like what you just described, I wouldn't even know where to guide them. We lean on just for like, okay, for example, the part where you have to notify your parents if a student asks for accommodations, like for you to use a different name or pronoun or so on and so forth. We lean on One Iowa or Iowa Safe Schools for advice around that, and we did receive some really great advice, and we were able to let the administrators know, hey, if this happens, before you call that parent, you're going to let the student know, give the student some time. Because we think that the harm will be caused if they felt like it was going to happen today or in the next hour. Does that make sense? So like within a reasonable amount of time, but work with the counselor and the principal to do those sorts of things. But we're definitely looking for where we could either be able to send families to for extra support, or students to for extra support, or staff to for extra support. definitely open to that.
I think University of Iowa has has a lot of, provides, has a lot of different units and provides different services for students, which I think it's a great thing, irrespective of your sexual orientation. But, the question I always ask is, do some students, are they comfortable going there? So that has always been my question, especially given what is happening in the state. Am I comfortable to go to meet this person? Do I trust them enough to tell them about me? And for them to give me are they qualified to give me adequate advice on things? But yeah, we have the university has, and I think students also find like the issue of family of choice. You have to someone you can trust and build that relationship amongst themselves. We have a lot of student organizations on campus and try to come together, form a two to four people within the group where you believe this is a trusted group, and I want to share my affinities with them, so students do that as well.
I'll say I feel like the conversation is really sort of beyond the. We wanted to sort of think about resources in a big way, but again, the population that I serve. Sort of building off of like what the university, I feel like the College of Education has also taken a lot of care to provide a lot of in-house support systems for our teacher candidates, our students, our graduate students. So I am really grateful for that. And then also the youth organization that you named, I'm sorry, say it again.
United Action for You.
United Action for You. So like part of the work too, neighborhood centers of Johnson County, United Action for Youth. I mean, again, we're fortunate like in Iowa City, there are nonprofits. We have this library space. We have the Stanley space. We have a lot of spaces for people. We have the Human Rights Center. We have Prairie Lights where people go. So I think that there are a lot of places. And then, of course, the young people can tell you where they go to really get their support. I think that I do feel I also work closely like with Great Plains Action Society, so thinking about the safety and well-being of Indigenous families and youth here in the Midwest. But I think that, I feel like despite this legislation, I hope that most young people feel like they can also turn. I know not always for sure, but of course they can turn to family members or community members and seek the support that they need. It's very scary at any age to feel isolated and to feel that you're not part of something. I imagine that, even though this is really impacting our K through 12 spaces, I really appreciate hearing that there are those adults in the school that are safe spaces, and that we just continue to sort of network and try to take care of our young people as best we can. I think that's what Keith Haring was fighting for every day in his life. I feel really honored that Iowa and that the art educator, Dr. Art, Ms. Ernst, had that vision that his work and his space and his teachings belonged here locally. And, our teacher education program has partnership with Horn Elementary, and we continue to, try to like uplift that idea again of humanity. So.
Yeah, thank you. I love that you brought that back to Haring, because he really believed that art could be healing.
That's right.
That it could be tremendously powerful to bring people together and to have a real impact on the quality of people's lives.
Yeah.
And I think through this exhibition and through the work that we're doing with the program, we're trying to create those kind of bridges that are healing and that can be very positive. And so, do you have any last things that you would like to add before we open up for general questions?
I would just say, because because I don't think people know this. So like, even though these spaces are made, our students of color aren't accessing them.
Yeah.
They're not going, and we are trying to figure out why. We don't know if it's because the people who are running it, they're not relating to the students, or if it's back to kind of like what you were saying, Professor, in regards to there being an additional layer of stigma depending on what community you're from, what culture you're from. But like our African American and our African and our Latino students will rarely be found in even the spaces that our other students are thriving in, specifically for our LGBTQ students.
Yeah, for me, I'm afraid of one thing. I don't want us to probably, for what is going on now, to lead to what happened in Zambia. One day, the president woke up and just declared Zambia as a Christian country. And I'm telling you, all the healthcare workers, they ran with the idea. So next thing that they discriminated against, because we did research with sexual and gender minority in Zambia, they discriminated against them big time. To an extent, some of the guys we interviewed said, I would rather die than go back to that place.
Wow.
And it was because the president, this is unintentional, declaring a country that has different religion as a Christian country, religious country. And this guy was seeing the sexual and gender minorities as the outside of the social order of the country. And I wouldn't want us to get to that state, because U.S. has these ambitious goals of eradicating the HIV by 2030. Right, and there's still a lot of people that are still yet to be tested for HIV. And, part of it was to expand PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis, which I think is highly effective if someone, it's in the blood for a long time. Well, we're struggling to get people, especially Black MSM in Iowa, to be on it, because some of them don't fit the social order, into the social order of Iowa, which I think, you could see I'll tell you another example of this unintentional aspects of this legislation was I wanted to interview 30 Black MSM in Iowa. Lane counts 10 in Lane, 10 in Johnson, and 10 in Blackhawk. I was only able to do 10 in Johnson, 2 in Blackhawk, no one from Lane. And we did a lot of tabling, we went to different Pride, a lot of organizations, despite the financial incentive, that people could let go of financial incentive because they wanted to protect their identity. And I think that's another aspect of things that we should. So stigma is super rife, and we should work towards channeling the information. That thing you mentioned about more people, and some of them also complain about people that are not like them. They can relate with people running some programs, so they will not go there. Yeah. So yeah.
I'm trying to think of what the closing thing is to say. So I think, the majority of teachers in the United States, about 80%, still continue to identify as white women. That is true in our teacher education program as well. There is a lot of empirical work around ideas of cultural mismatch, racial mismatch, where I think what we are trying to do in the teacher education program is have open conversations about these realities. My very dear friend and I get into arguments because she says, I say, well, there are people of color in Iowa. And she says, yes, but much fewer than anywhere else in the Midwest. That the majority of this state, also 85% of the population, identifies as white. And so she and I get into, she's an educator too, and she teaches in Boston and lives in Stockton, California. So she is in a very different context, right? And so she says to me, when I teach, about racial justice and racial literacy to my teacher candidates, who are also, many of them white, identifying, she says, but I know how they are going to serve, like the communities that they are going to serve. She says, I worry for you because you're really trying to make the importance of the teachers' critical sociocultural knowledge and racial literacy central to the teaching that you do in this teacher education program. And they may really feel that, why do you keep telling me this? Because I live in Iowa. And I don't need to know that because I am more likely going to teach majority white children. And here's the thing. Every teacher must understand the importance of every human's humanity. And if you cannot understand and honor and love, Asa Hilliard said, I've never met a child who was not a genius. The first thing you have to do is treat them like a human being, and the second thing you do is love them. And that is what I bring forward. I'm like, and I argue with my friend. I said, I know I'm in Iowa, but I am going to unapologetically ask that you develop your critical sociocultural knowledge and that you teach a culturally relevant pedagogy, that you understand systemic harm. Because in Iowa and across the nation and across the world, we have to be part of liberation. Not just equality, not just equity, but the liberation of our brothers, sisters, and families and communities. So we're trying, you know, I'm trying. My colleague is here, Dr. Allison Rowe. She's trying every day through art education. So I hope that we can continue to that teachers can continue to find ways to reach the young people who are sitting in front of them. And I do think that the first thing is, you know, asking our teacher candidates to think, you know, how do you see their humanity? What is the bias that you carry in your body? What are the sort of stereotypes and single stories that you are not willing to let go of? So we do a lot of work, like archaeology of self. We listen to Black and brown and indigenous and queer and trans scholars. We bring in those voices. So we are never, right, Maya Angelou said, she never steps on a stage. She brings everybody with her. She says, come with me to be a rainbow in somebody's cloud. So a rainbow in the cloud? I think that's what she said. I'm like quoting Dr. Angelou and misquoting. But anyway, so I hope that is, you know, and the world across the nation, you know, we're trying to recruit more teachers of color. But teaching is hard, as Lauren is sharing, right? We're not necessarily safe. We're not paid that well. There are a lot of challenges. But I think our young people and their families deserve teachers as transformative intellectuals, and so that's what we're thriving for here, striving for, and trying. Yeah.
I really appreciate the work that you're all doing and for coming to share and remind us of the importance of not just the ability to access information, to have access to accurate information from many sources, to have representation for students, places where they feel that they can be represented, that they are represented already, and that there are communities for them within schools and beyond where they can access all of the information that they need. So at this point, I'd like to open it up to questions from the audience, and we have Lauren Cox here who will facilitate the microphone.
So you guys had been discussing a little bit kind of this disconnect between what you're trying to teach teachers at a teacher educational level and the reality of actually working in the school system and the barriers that keep getting faced when we are given problems such as like this Senate motion that's being passed. Are there specific ways you try to teach your teachers to combat these kinds of issues of censorship and different techniques they can use to try to work around the different problems they may face in the more hands-on practical work environment when they're facing such issues?
Yeah, I hope I've been trying to answer that question actually the whole evening. Yeah, we say you have to know legislation. You have to know what it means. You have to be community activists and you have to participate. Teaching is not an 8 to 3 job, right? You have to be a critical teacher in your whole life, right? You're not gonna find the perfect book. You're not going to find, right? But it's about your own knowledge, your own intellectual understandings of how this world works, and that your pursuit to keep thinking critically. And as I shared, right, people have always done the work, right, through much more and intense atrocities than even what we live through right now. There have always been brilliant educators, and there have always been beautiful children. We do talk about teaching history accurately. We're pretty unapologetic. I can't talk about everybody, but I am unapologetic about that, you know? But the thing is, we, as a teacher education program, your journey is not finished in these 3 years or 4 years. What I hope is that the teachers who leave our program are curious and willing to keep asking questions and keep showing up. So if that seed is planted, that you have work on the ground that you need to do. You need to participate in big conversations, right? I mean, there is something really beautiful. I was a teacher for 17 years in Texas. I taught elementary school K through 2. You can think about your work as, I'm gonna go in, I'm gonna close the door, I'm gonna do my thing, and I'm gonna leave. Okay, that's not really helping anybody, right? I know it's a way to protect, but how can you show up and be part of the board meeting conversation? How can you be a voice in your, but you can't be an ignorant voice, right? You gotta know some things. But what we hope is that the teachers who leave our program see themselves as leaders, not just in the context of their school or their community, you know, but like in the field, right? And so we want them to ask questions. We want them to think about their public speaking ability. Can you stand up in front of a crowd and talk about the things that matter to you? We ask them to constantly reflect on, why do you do this work? So it is hard, but I think that there is, I know that at Iowa City Public Schools, there are genius teachers who are critical scholars, critical educators. And I think the thing about the legislation is, right, it's a lot of it is like, if you are afraid enough, even if whatever the legislation is saying, you have to somehow understand that being afraid is not really an option, right? And you know, it's real. People do lose their jobs. People do suffer real consequences. I hope people will vote. I hope that people will keep fighting for our young people and their families.
We're definitely, in the school district, it's hard to have transformative justice because of the state. Mm-hmm. So our cabinet leans on our legal counsel for what we can do. And I'll be honest, our legal counsel is kind of conservative. So those gray areas that we talked about, do you get what I'm saying? And in our community, if we were to, I don't know, give some underlying messages like, just do whatever you want to do, it'll be okay, we'll be on the news. Like, our board meeting will be packed with people asking for our jobs, period. So, like, there's not that much room to be radical because of that fear piece that they've instilled so cleverly. To where you have some staff members going into other staff members' classes, like, there was this poster, should that be there? There's nothing about the legislation that tells you to do that. Does that make sense? You know what I'm saying? So we have people, because people are on different sides of whatever, and they're gonna use this opportunity to express, you know, that. So I would love to say, we're training our teachers up to be radical. That is not the truth. In Iowa City Community School Districts, we are trying to abide by the laws as much as possible and do whatever we can within our locus of control to show our staff, show our students that they're welcome, safe, and included, despite what's happening on the outside.
So, is it working? I can't really hear. Okay. I'm not a teacher or, going into teaching, but I'm getting my master's in library science right now, and 2 of my parents work in the district. So these issues are like very close to my heart. And I feel like people in the field of teaching and libraries and all these spaces understand that you kind of have to just push through and, keep that like hope and optimism alive. But I feel like talking to people outside of those spaces, I encounter this sort of like casual pessimism about the state of things right now. Like my grandma's like, well, if you want to be a librarian, you can't live in Iowa. I'm like, okay, so we're just gonna like banish all the librarians and the teachers from Iowa. Like, how do you have these conversations with people who aren't dealing with them every day and like communicate like, no, please, like we need to do things about it, not just like complain about how bad things are.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I would definitely say that we need more empathy, giving and receiving to happen. And maybe that happens through people hearing actual voices that are impacted by the changes. But that pessimism that you talk about, I think is so easy to do when you feel disconnected, when you feel like it's far from you, or it doesn't really fully impact you. So that's unfortunate. But I definitely think that as a community, we need to do more story sharing. We need to do more, which builds empathy. We need to hear from the voices of people who are impacted.
Hi, thank you so much for sharing. I'm also coming from the library science program, so I think there's just like so much overlap between librarians, teachers, and this kind of work. I'm wondering, in these kinds of situations, obviously the mental health and well-being of students is hugely impacted. I'm curious about how we can have conversations too around the mental health and well-being of the people who are trying to do this work, and how constantly doing, like thinking day in and day out, like, okay, what do I do for my students? What if I have to tell their parents? Or just, I don't know, just mental health in general and well-being of like trying to deal with these problems all the time. And stigma too. Any suggestions for that?
Oh, that's such an important question.
Yeah.
Would you like to take this one? Would you like to start?
Okay, I'll
Yeah.
try. So that's another unintentional effect of the legislation, as a student thinking, oh, am I going to get a job, all of these things, and am I going to be restricted? And like, I know that, Animal Farm is a good book for political consciousness, right? Mm-hmm. Well, now imagine me being a librarian, I'd be like, oh my God, what do I need to do? So I get a point. That's why I'm saying that we should be able to go to our leaders, as well as some of these meetings that Iowa City or some of these school districts organize, and we should be able to go here and let them know the unintentional impact of some of these legislations on people. Some people just sit up there and make this line, wow, this suits us, let's just pass it very fast. They don't think about others, they only think about the political agenda. So I taught in a class yesterday, I spoke about the impact of political determinants of health. Some of the policies that our so-called leaders, they come up with, how they affect our lives. They don't think about them. They just come up with one. They don't even care, the effect of it. I think we need to start to talk about the importance of politics and policies on our health. So I agree with you. I don't have the right answer, but we need to start speaking to the authority, speaking truth to power for them to know the impact. It's just the same thing like the policies around sugar, salt, all of those things. So it's the same thing. Now education affecting mental health. and you're thinking, oh, I might be able to become a librarian. Let me change my courses and all those things. So, yeah, I'm sorry you have to go through that, though. Yeah. Any other suggestions?
So, I mean, at a micro level, right, I think that we know there's something important about, like, radical rest, right? Joy, where do you start the story, right? Do you start with the story of oppression, or do you start with the story of joy? And I think there's a balance somewhere of both, of truth-telling there. But I do think that, like in the previous question about the sort of, how did you say it, the casual sort of pessimism. I think what also Director Lawrence said about, well, sometimes you can have that if you don't feel like it's actually your problem, which that concerns me because this is everybody's problem, right? But I will say those of us who are talking about it a lot and showing up a lot, and it's our actual paid job to do, there also has to be some boundaries, right? There has to be some time to rest. But it cannot be, I always struggle when people say, well, I just have to turn off the headlines. I can't talk, I can't, I'm like, well, that is privilege too. And it's, it's like, what do you do with your privilege? And so, yeah, maybe you need to step away for a minute, so that you can get yourself and you can rest and you can breathe and you can eat and you can dance and you can do all of that. But you can't just shut it off. I can't. And so sometimes I might look like the most wild person in the room because my emotions are up here and I've been going at it, and I have to pay attention to my own body and say, okay, now you're starting to cry as soon as someone says something, or this is going, you need to rest for a little bit. And you need to think about the world not in terms of like the harm that is happening, but also the genius and the joy that is happening. So I listen to Beyonce. Like, I listen to B every day. And I might be really sad, for whatever hours of the day, but for those few minutes when I get to hear her, I'm like, okay, yes. And it restores me. So I think people have to find, as you're talking about restorative justice, how do you restore yourself? How do you sit in community with people who also just let you be you and let you say what you need to say? I don't think the thing is, I will say in my teacher education, I say to the teacher candidates, please don't ever try to stand in anyone's shoes. That's not what you do. But you should have a seat at the table, and you should learn to listen. And sometimes, just showing up also for other people, for your community members, in spaces and being there and listening is also really healing and restorative to those who are telling their stories, right? But, it's a lot. And I will say, even as a teacher educator, I don't know everybody in the room. I don't know what they're thinking or what they're feeling about what I'm saying. But I try to keep everybody's humanity intact, but also speak truth to what is happening, to the best of my ability.
I think that kind of having that outlet, whether it's music, making music, listening to it, making art, looking at art, reading literature, writing, all those forms of art are really powerful ways for us to come together, for us to hear other people's stories, to see representation of other viewpoints. And that's something that we can do on our own, in our own time. It's something that we can do together, collectively. And that is a small kind of everyday step that can be powerful if we allow it to be.
Yeah, and I will say that it's important, like right now we are celebrating James Baldwin's, this year would have been 100 years. James Baldwin is a king. And I will say that when you hear the voices of ancestors, you understand that also none of this is new, right? So it's also good to remember that. We're not actually in a new thing. We're just in a different version of it. And so how do we keep confronting that? There's a question right here. Thank you, Lauren.
Isn't the problem not education or books that people read? I mean, that is a problem. But I mean, aren't we confronting in our society with the banning of books, thus the banning of ideas?
Absolutely.
Isn't it, I think it's a culture of fear, where politicians who are liberal and conservative are afraid of each other. It crystallizes in the problem of the homeless, the problem of diversity, multiculturalism, and inclusion, because many European Americans think that every time a Native American or a Black person, African American, every time Hispanic is the border issue too, but also about the Hispanics who are already here, Asian Americans, it seems like there's this enormous fear that we're repeating the history at the end of the Roman Empire, and the barbarian kings were not at first welcomed, with their tribes welcomed into the Roman Empire until it reached a point where there was a demographic decline and the Latins could no longer maintain control, so they had to take the Germanic kings into their administrations and their military because there was a manpower shortage. And we're having a manpower shortage soon in another generation. They'll have to bring in people from Latin America because work needs to be done. They're not replacing European Americans. It's just work has to be done. These people have to come, you know, and what are we going to do? They think the world is falling apart around them. And the Trump, excuse me for maybe politicizing it, but that's where Trump gets his power, by appearing to encourage these people in this kind of fear. And it's
it's all about a cultivation. I agree. It's a cultivation of fear, and it I think fundamentally comes down to, right? Who has power, and what are you afraid of losing? We have a question back there.
Hi. This just popped into my head. I don't know if, like, 1984 is banned in some schools here, but are you guys, like, do you guys think that some students are starting to, like, as they get older, see the parallels between things that are happening in our government and things that have happened in fictional books?
Or in the government
Yes.
forever. Yeah. I hope so. You know.
I'm confident in our generations to come. Like I think that they'll be like, why are they keeping this from us? What's in there?
Also ban it.
Let me get it.
Let me find it. Where is it? Right? I mean, it's banned in school, but it's not banned in your home or in your community, or, you know, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I think that's why, you know, one of the things that school is going to do or should do is encourage you to be curious and continue to pursue knowledge, right? So, yes, I think those are all really, that book in particular speaks to a very, I think you were actually saying, right? You named 1984 and you named Animal Farm, right? I mean, books have been banned forever, yeah. I mean, so it's not a new thing.
Well, I guess another unintentional aspect of this legislation, probably they thought, oh, we're banning this, but it leads to more curiosity. Because my daughter is asking why this book banned. It's like, well, the school district, do you want to read it? Okay, you can read this. You can check this out. So it leads to more curiosity, and, you know, and I think that's interesting to see that. So, yeah.
I think the great Toni Morrison thought it was a real badge of honor. Like, please ban me, right? So, yeah. And, you know, libraries have Banned Book Week. It's a big, celebrated, important week. So, yeah, grateful for libraries.
So, hopefully to counter.
I know, I've been wondering about it. Does work. It's working. Okay.
To counter that pessimism that you were mentioning, and using some of your words, joy and genius, a question for Laura. Are you optimistic when you interact with our children and kids in schools? Have they been galvanized by the challenging context? What has been the reaction in general?
I don't think they're galvanized at all. I don't see that. I am optimistic. I feel like I think this too shall pass. If not, I wouldn't come to work. Because it's all bad. If it's like, so this is just what it's going to be. We're not going to talk about diversity. We're not going to talk, you know what I'm saying? Like, we won't talk about anything. I just have hope that it will change. I feel like what's happening for our young people that I've talked to, the wheels are turning in how they can change this, how they can go around, underneath, above. They're radical already.
So it was mentioned earlier that just because certain topics of conversation are prohibited in a K through 12 setting doesn't mean that students don't already know about them. So what can we do, not just from a K through 12 standpoint, but also from a public health standpoint when it comes to topics like gender identity and HIV and things like that? From a K through 12 and public health standpoint, how can we make sure that kids are getting accurate information and have access to that information when they get curious or when they just hear things, you know?
Well, thank you very much. That's an excellent question. I guess it's also, goes back to the educators, their training. Because wherever you're teaching should be informed by research. I mean, adequate research, not just one paper, two papers. You have to do some level of systematic review and know what is out there in Africa, in America, in Europe, and compare and contrast. And I think it's really important. Going to that extent, I think I understand the teachers, they just want to teach whatever is given to them within the whatever curriculum and just look for one thing to teach. So I think they should probably encourage teachers to do adequate research too before they teach, and check with maybe a senior person to look at the research and all of those things. For me, I think kids should be, because I teach health promotion and disease prevention and global health, I believe people should be taught how to prevent something, but there are different ways to make it fun, especially for kids, through play. You could teach them, you guys shouldn't, let's say, don't share nail cutters, all of those things. There are ways to present it to them, and they won't be curious to you don't even need to tell them it's because of hepatitis C, for example, or it's because of HIV. You don't even, it should be part of the hygiene. And you don't share toothbrush, because if you share toothbrush with someone with hepatitis C, you're more likely to contract it as well. So we don't need to name the disease it should be age appropriate. We don't need to name the disease, but we teach them the hygiene that will lead them to behave in a kind of responsible manner. Because, not all kids that come to school, you ask them about, what's your HIV status? No. You can't ask everyone about it, but you can teach people to be careful and to be responsible, and nobody will contract anything because when they're responsible. Yeah.
We offer professional development. It's voluntary, though, for staff to hear from different researchers, professionals around how to still uphold equity in your classroom and cultural diversity in your classroom without fear. We've offered opportunities for that. Unfortunately, they've not been attended the best because they are voluntary, so on and so forth. But even Senate House File 802, I don't know if you all are familiar with that one, but it talks about how you cannot, the ones that really stand out, you cannot say that Iowa is systemically racist. You cannot say, you cannot blame one group for systemic racism. You can't say America is systemically racist. You just can't say it. You can lose your license over it. So things like that, where when students organically bring things up and they can say those things and they want to dialogue, again, we're trying to struggle with ways that how can we help our staff be confident. Some have it. Some can maneuver through that, be confident to have an honest dialogue with them, not let people say things that are untrue, right, and let it just sit there. We do have staff members who are able to do it. Unfortunately, we still have a number of them that will be frozen in that moment and like, I don't know, you know what I'm saying, like try to switch out of that as quickly as possible. So that's a challenge. Like, how do we get more of them educated around how to have those conversations when they come up, and still be comfortable, still be confident, and still be truthful?
And I think kind of thinking broadly about the other adults in kids' lives. They spend a lot of time with teachers every day. They spend a lot of time with parents, but there are family members, there are doctors that they know, school nurses, and other places that they may go regularly, like the library or the Natural History Museum or the Stanley Museum, where some of these ideas are part of the presentations or part of information that's available to them. So even though some places might get cut off for certain forms of information to be shared, there can be other avenues. Unfortunately, sometimes parents have to get a little creative to find those, or the kids have to get creative. But I think the question of what support systems are available, just very widespread through a community, is really important.
I think Aiden, yeah. Hi, Aiden.
So one of the things that I'll just like preface this with is I am in complete thought that the legislation passed regarding anything having to do with education at this point in time has to do with fear. Mm-hmm. I'm just wondering if I could have your opinions on if it's more fear of young people, if it's more fear of the power that educators possess. And then you mentioned specifically that, in my privilege, I will probably not use the correct language, but LGBTQ, especially it sounds like in the Black sector, are not going and using community resources. Do you think that stems more from maybe systemic distrust? And then in the system that we are creating right now regarding young people and educators, how someday will we be able to get rid of this distrust that young people may eventually possess because the system will not educate them properly?
Oh, that's so good.
Yeah.
That's my student.
You get an A.
That's my student.
You get your A. Yeah, no, you're right. It has to do with systemic distrust as to why they're not going into those spaces. I don't have the answer for what exactly the way forward looks like, but I think enough of us are curious that we'll figure it out one day. Especially our students. I think it's going to start. I think there'll be a movement. I think the movement will start with them. I don't think that they're afraid of. I don't think they're afraid of teachers. I think they're afraid of students bringing home things that they're not prepared to talk about, to own up to have discourse around. You'd be surprised at how many parents don't talk to their kids about sex at the appropriate time. Do you get what I'm saying? They're leaning on something from the school district, and then they want to dictate exactly what that looks like. Does that make sense? So I'm always shocked. I'm like, well, why wouldn't you have that conversation first? You would rely on us to educate them on all those things. So, I think it's around, I'm not ready for that. And even on the racially, I had a Black parent who didn't want her children to hear anything about slavery until middle school. And I just was shocked. Do you see what I'm saying? So there's this piece of wanting to control what students receive when, out of this kind of real concern about, I don't want them to know too much too fast. I don't want them to worry. I don't want them to this. I don't want them to not, have questions or question me in a way that I can't answer confidently. So I think pride is at the bottom of it, fear, and some other things are underlying there, under the iceberg of those big, emotions or whatever around, no, you won't with mine. And it's unfortunate. And I'm saying it's unfortunate only because, we want all of our children to be global citizens. We want them to be competitive in a global society. And what's happening is when you take your kid and you're like, no, I'll keep all these things from them, you're just preparing them to work in your backyard their whole life. I don't know, like they won't be able to go out and manage dynamics of difference, and that's what you really want them to do. You want them to be able to go out, whether they're here or in a different country or whatever, and be able to thrive.
I was in Washington, D.C. this weekend, and I had the honor and privilege to visit the Museum of African American History and Culture. And the bottom 3 floors are the history part, and the top 3 floors is the cultural part. And so many of the families that were, there were people from all over the world, and I'm in Washington, D.C., there were so many people, but I went down with my 21-year-old son, and we start at the beginning of the Atlantic slave trade, and you work your way up. And you could spend days there, just on those bottom 3 floors. But I saw so many elders talking to really young children about what they were hearing and seeing and the videos and the beautiful pedagogy and curation of how do we, I was like there to see, but I was also learning so much from, and young, Black children really there with their elders, listening carefully. And I thought, there is so much trauma in this room, but there is also a way that they are telling the story again, that it starts from, look at the genius of our people, look at the beauty of our people, and at the same time not watering down any of the brutality. So there is a way to do it. There is a way to do it. And I hope that, again, like I do think the responsibility of teacher education programs, and whether you agree that it's the teacher's responsibility to do that or not, but it is a teacher's responsibility to tell the truth. And I hope that when teachers leave our program, they leave with the pedagogical curiosity and pursuit of humanity, and that they have a responsibility to tell truthfully. And it does matter where you start the story and whose voice you center and how do you teach people to have a seat at the table.
Thank you, Saba.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us tonight. We're just after 7:30, so I know everybody is very busy and it's been a long day for everyone. So I'm going to wrap this up. I'm just going to close with something that Keith Haring wrote in his notebook that I think is a nice way to leave in a place that gives us some kind of hope for moving forward. He wrote, "Whatever else I am, I'm sure I at least have been a good companion to a lot of children, and maybe have touched their lives in a way that will be passed down through time and taught them a kind of simple lesson on sharing and caring." And I think that through all the work that you're all doing here, I think that at the very least, that is what you're doing, and you're doing so much more and so much hard work. So thank you all for everything that you've brought to us.
And thank you all for coming out on a Thursday night. We're so grateful.